That makes me think of a telescope in the shape of a cactus. Like maybe you have like one viewing port, but you have multiple potential lenses you can go out of, and like you can adjust the optics. You're like, so you can really get some different zoom factors. You know, maybe for like an educational sort of circumstance where like you're like, oh, like that's the moon, but like if you switch it over, you can now zoom in like 100 times.
What is up, creative critters? It's your boy Eugene Choi.
And I'm Jonathan.
And it's Michael.
And welcome to the Pample Pod, the show with candid conversations and creative chaos. Today, on this beautiful Monday, we are going to dive right into this week's big question and thanks mom segment a bit after that. But I did prepare a question that kind of has been in the back of my mind for not just the past couple months, but for a while. It's like dealing with honesty. So here's the question that I want the three of us to kind of bounce around for a bit. Does honesty always serve an entrepreneur's best interests, or are there times when strategic ambiguity is necessary? As a kid, you're taught growing up, always tell the truth. Being honest pays off. But, I think as being an adult, you kind of realize that there's a bit more nuance to that. And especially if you're an entrepreneur trying to raise capital, you're in front of a board of directors or investors at a networking event. I'm sure you're tempted to try to paint a really rosy picture in front of people. But even beyond that, do you guys think being honest all the time pays off?
I think I'm pretty biased in that view because I'm definitely an advocate for raw honesty. But I think people tend to see honesty as soft, or like being soft, or it's like being a good person, you're going to get walked over. But I really do believe it's a asymmetric weapon of sorts. I think having that raw honesty tends to give you that credibility, even with investors or people you work with and your own employees. There are ways to balance it where, when I say raw honesty, you're not necessarily giving all your trade secrets away, of course. So within reason, right? Like most things in life, it requires balance. But I think having that honesty where you're maybe leaning less towards the rosy picture, or maybe it is a truly rosy picture as long as you can kind of back it up. But just being honest first gives you that credibility. Addressing your challenges, the hard things, even as an investor, that's what I would want to see. I wouldn't want someone that tells me, oh, everything is great. I want to see someone who can honestly tell me, that they have or show me that they have a comprehension of a certain subject, which includes understanding the good and the bad. I think skill and honesty are two separate topics, right? So if you're honest and not doing a great job at something, you definitely are going to run into the issue of like, well, something's maybe not working, or you went down the wrong path, and then there's an obvious issue of being honest is not going to pay off. But it's not that it's not going to pay off because you're honest. It's not going to pay off because you were doing the wrong thing from a technical standpoint. I think that's the key differentiator there. I think as long as you are doing well and able to correct yourself, or set yourself on the right path from a business case perspective or a technical perspective, there's nothing wrong with being honest. I think that's kind of how I would break it down, maybe. Yeah,
because I could see how some people, the way how they would say this is, no matter what you say, whether it's the truth or not, say what people are going to like to hear. If the truth is something that people would like to hear, by all means say it. But if you're trying, if the truth is something that maybe investors would not want to hear, maybe you might try to cover it up with like a white lie, or say something say whatever you're proposing as a company ends up, it's more promising than it actually is, or maybe you're running into more issues than you expected, but you don't want to say that outright in front of other people, because then you're concerned as an individual that people might be more wary about supporting you and your venture.
Yeah, and maybe just add some nuance to what I said. I would say that you can be honest and still be sensitive in your delivery and have some emotional intelligence with how you deliver something without necessarily going into the white lie territory, or at least maybe not as deep into the white lie territory. Those don't have to be mutually exclusive, I think, too. I think because sometimes you think of, raw honesty and you think of someone who's like, almost being annoying with it or very insensitive with it, and like, I'm gonna tell it how it is, or something along those lines. Doesn't have to be that way. You can still be brutally transparent while being respectful or courteous. I don't see those things as
No, that's a really good distinction to make, and it's something to keep in mind when having this kind of discussion. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and to highlight something I think Michael brought up earlier about skill and honesty being independent, that I think there definitely are circumstances where investors, I don't know, where entrepreneurs have gotten a head start by being dishonest, but it doesn't make up for a lack of skill, especially later down the road. Like if you, for example, have an idea that's technically unsound and then you raise a bunch of money for it, you still have a bad idea. And you can spend that money however you want on the bad idea. But unless you get skill, then you're either going to just have to get in this cycle where you're going into greater and greater debt, borrowing more money, or you're going to have to like pivot and like backtrack on what you've already done in order to start like on a project that actually makes sense and like can generate a profit. So I think that while there are people who have gotten like initial success through being dishonest, and sometimes that initial success is like a springboard for greater accomplishments. There have been some very large economic bubbles that are completely unfounded, both in history and I think in the modern age. But they do eventually come crashing down most of the time.
Yeah.
Gives Theranos. No, but jokes aside, I think you have a very good point, and especially for early stage founders who want to be honest and transparent, I think sometimes that process can be frustrating, right? And I think we've seen it too on the sort of the venture studio side of things, where you'll look at others and you're like, well, they're kind of being dishonest about their engineering, but they're raising so much money because they're selling this rosy picture, and it feels a little unfair. And to your point, it doesn't mean the product actually works. You might be spinning your wheels later down the line and just sort of defer when you crash. But seeing that can have an impact on people who want to be honest, and they see others raising money and they're like, well, if they're doing it, maybe I should do that as well. But I think it's all the more reason to hold to your values, or I guess that's kind of like a test of your values in a way too, and your ability to kind of hunker down and believe in that raw honesty. And if anything, work your approach so that it works, because it will be more sustainable, right? I think that's when it becomes all the more critical, as frustrating as it may be to see others succeed, when you know that they have a product that's maybe not hinging on real science or engineering. Yeah.
So on this topic of like internal personal conflict, which I'm sure many of us listening to this and some of us here in this room, which I would sometimes struggle, especially when you're seeing other people succeed. And on the topic of with brutal honesty, do you guys know personally anyone who, or maybe anyone you've researched before, who have either benefited or suffered from trying to be honest, or in this term, maybe be brutally honest in some extent?
Yeah, at least benefited. I can, like, two people immediately come to mind. One would be Alexis Ohanian, Reddit, the founder of Reddit, and was it 776 Ventures as well. He's known for being, and he has an interesting masterclass available too for anyone who might want to look him up and sort of learn more about his style. But he's known for having being pretty honest and transparent about startup struggles as well as social issues. He was known for pushing diversity, for example, on Reddit's board of directors. And, he's someone who's immensely successful. He's done really well for himself, and he's always advocated for that transparency and honesty. And I think that's a really good, commendable example of success. And then maybe a more recent one that's maybe more popular in recent times that might speak to people, I would say Sam Altman as well.
Oh, yeah.
He's known for being pretty transparent about the ethical concerns around AI and some of its limitations. And that, that's something I do appreciate, because it's a very current topic, and it's not without its implications. And so having someone who's spearheading a major organization like OpenAI while still being open about, some of the drawbacks or valid concerns that there are with implementing artificial intelligence, I think that's, also pretty commendable and an example of transparency.
I don't know of any examples of founders being burned by being too honest. And oftentimes there is risk with being dishonest, at least from like a legal sense. That's also kind of an important dynamic to capture. Like if you are being like explicitly dishonest in a business setting, then like it's very possible that like that's fraud, and that you should go to jail for that.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important dynamic of the conversation to capture. Like there are reasons, like even if you're a completely like selfish person and you're very short-sighted and wanting to make temporary gains, like it's important to be honest, if for nothing else, because like it's something that you have to do legally.
That is true. And right off of that point, Jonathan, where I think being honest is, you'd be better off of it, not just profit, but like you're saying, legally, and just to cover your own butt, so to speak. Michael, you mentioned emotional intelligence a while back, and I wanted to poke at that for a bit more because there is that is definitely something that is worth considering, especially as an entrepreneur, someone that's just trying to sell your product to to people outside of your company. Being able to say things in a way that is sensitive and respectful of the party involved, it does get me wondering, how do you balance saying that kind of truth in an optimistic kind of manner, but also be grounded and say things that is true, like you're saying, Jonathan, just be honest with what you need to say, but say it in a way that could still get people to be on your side, so to speak, without kind of turning them off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially in storytelling when you're trying to sell your idea.
Yeah, because it doesn't mean you can't be optimistic. I think it's maybe a question of balancing vision and execution, meaning, sell the dream, but only if you can back it up with either concrete data or a realistic plan. Sometimes just having the data is not enough. You also need some tangible plan. But that, to me, doesn't stop you from having that vision as well. I think that's an important part of, being a founding team is you kind of need to have something you're striving towards. But to your point, I think it is important to kind of stay grounded. And that's what really ties in the whole transparency with the skill, sort of. So you want to be confident. I think there's nothing wrong with that, but you don't want to be delusional as well. So that's where balance comes in. So, and you brought up storytelling, and that's something that's an important art to master, and it's something that's really important to us. And we kind of have a nice framework for that, I think, which is our why, what, and how. That works pretty nicely. The why is that vision part. Like, why do you even care about doing that in the first place? It kind of gives you that sense of direction. Your what is the sort of the concreteness of what you're going to do about it, right? And then your how is basically that detailed, realistic plan too. So you can kind of think of that as a bit of a loose framework for how you can navigate being optimistic without being delusional as well, because now your storytelling framework is tied into not just the vision, but concretely what and how you're going to get it done. And I think that keeps you a little bit grounded and sort of safeguards you there.
Yeah, and that kind of plan that you mentioned that you need definitely requires a lot of foresight on your end as an entrepreneur. You have to be able to identify, well, you need the vision first, right? But then you also have to be able to identify what are the risks that are endangering your vision, what's keeping your vision from happening right now, what are the limitations right now. But you have to, as an individual, have to be able to identify all those risks, all the red flags beforehand, and then in your head be able to figure out ways to address those solutions. But that's part of the optimism where it's like, hey, I know what I want to do. I know that there's things holding me back from this, and there are challenges that I and my team will have to address. But we already we're aware of that, and here's how we're going to solve that. Here are our mitigations, our plans. So I think that is that optimism where it's like you do need to be aware, and it can't be blind optimism like you're saying. You don't want to be delusional. You can't just be like, we'll just figure it out along the way. We'll fumble our way, but we'll get there. That's not really how it works. And then you end up with those legal problems, like you're saying, Jonathan, where you just end up trying to sell a lie without really having any substance to that plan, the execution on that idea. And I think that's a handful of startups would probably struggle with that, where they have the idea, but maybe they don't really have their execution is still kind of half-baked, where they don't really think about how they're going to execute it. And then they end up getting caught in an awkward situation, especially when maybe investors have questions, trying to really poke at their ideas, be like, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And then if these entrepreneurs just haven't really thought about that, then they're just caught in a really awkward situation.
Yeah, sure. I think once you've applied that foresight genuinely, and if you have that honesty, like in those investor meetings, it really shines through whether you've, give those different aspects consideration, whether it's the legal, the business case, the sales channels, the technical, like you can really tell when someone's genuinely thought about it and they're being transparent.
One thing I wanted to kind of follow up on and maybe add a bit of my thoughts on was, you mentioned like, how do you remain honest while also kind of selling a story or appealing to like a specific audience? Or I guess that's sort of leading the question, because what I wanted to mention was that you can be honest, but tailor your response to be intelligent, like for the person that you're talking to. For example, like if you're applying to a job and the job has like, certain qualifications, you have those qualifications. You probably have other qualifications too. And when you're talking to the interviewer, you're probably going to emphasize the things that they want you to have, like the qualifications that are relevant to the job. Likewise, when you're selling a project or selling a product to people, you want to understand like what they need it for. And you can emphasize the way that you've tested that use case even if there's other potential use cases, you de-emphasize them so you can focus on what really matters.
Yeah, being an honest individual does not indicate how prepared you are at a given moment. And I think you can definitely be honest and confident with what you're saying. I think Michael, and then what you were saying just earlier, and Jonathan, what you're saying right now, where it's like, if you come prepared to whoever you're talking to, or you're just being prepared as an individual, as a leadership trying to plan the next steps for your team, being able to know what you're going to do. And like to your point, Jonathan, if you know what to say to individuals, you can be frank with the things that you're struggling with, but you don't have to be so, you don't have to come off as ashamed or like fumbling with the words on the spot when you're trying to explain something to the other individual. You could have had addressed these in your own time, and then you could come out of that experience, that introspective experience, more confident because you've already put thought into it, and then you know what to say, and you know how to address it. And you could say that to other people. If anything, being honest that way could end up actually make you a lot more charismatic to the individuals, because they know, hey, this guy is not holding anything back. He knows what he has to deal with, but he actually has a plan to deal with those things, rather than being an alternate version of yourself that's always just trying to say things to please other people, and just trying to just hide whatever is not good from them.
Yeah, I think with the honesty, you can hold your moral ground, and that does, I think, result in you being either more charismatic and or more trustworthy. And I think to your point, Jonathan, about tailoring a message, I think to me that's a great example, because it's not like you're lying or being deceitful. There are multiple truths or facets to any given plan or strategy. And so emphasizing one, if anything, makes for clarity and communication, while still being true that, you're just being honest or emphasizing that one aspect. Because, sometimes when you're doing things that are very multifaceted, it is also helpful for conveying a message to just emphasize one part and not another. Now, us internally, we have to be aware of all these facets and, be able to communicate them transparently. But in terms of external communication, I think it's totally acceptable to pick one aspect to emphasize just for simplicity in communication in order to help convey a message more powerfully.
Alrighty, so before we wrap up this first segment, and before we go to Thanks Mom, I just want to ask you guys one more question. How can an entrepreneur maintain credibility while avoiding giving away too much to other people?
I think it's totally acceptable to talk in principles and not blueprints. And what I mean by that is you can definitely share your approach to something and the values that you have in that approach without giving away proprietary detail. I think in a lot of cases, especially for startups, they're very worried about giving away proprietary information. And to some extent, that makes sense, right? Because you typically don't have the resources to win in a legal battle. You're not going to realistically be able to take someone to court in order to sue them for proprietary right infringement, even if you do have a patent and everything is valid. So having that proprietary moat is valid, but I think the real moat is really more so the execution, right? If someone can take your idea and beat you to the punchline, the real problem wasn't the secrecy you had around your data, it was the execution that you had around it. And so I think because people sometimes are so worried about protecting information, that's why they're worried about the transparency. But to me, that the real critical factor in preserving that proprietary knowledge is, to some extent, being discreet, but also really the execution that you have around it. So given that, nothing really stops you from sharing what you're saying, at least in terms of approach and values. And we're still somewhat in stealth mode, right? But we still go out to events and we still talk to different investors and others. And we're able to kind of tell them what we work on fairly openly, again, because of that principle. So I think that allows us, if anything, to be consistent in what we tell, and at least in some sense have that credibility while still balancing the two.
All right. Well, let's move on to the next segment, Thanks Mom, where we talk to Mom, aka ChatGPT, to generate 2 random prompts where we will try to ideate around and create a new, potentially lucrative venture. Alrighty.
Let's see. That's a good example of, I think us being pretty transparent with the whole idea of execution.
Yeah.
Right? Like, putting our money where our word is, I guess.
This is as transparent as we can get.
Yeah.
In front of the
I
camera.
actually don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
If we like,
This is not scripted, by the way, if anyone's listening. We do not know what Mom's going to create for us.
Exactly.
All right. Okay.
What do we get?
This thing good?
What do we get?
All right. Good luck with us. This one. Cactus telescope.
No. Perfect. That makes me think of a telescope in the shape of a cactus. Like maybe you have like one viewing port, but you have multiple potential lenses you can go out of, and like you can adjust the optics. You're like, So you can really get some different zoom factors, maybe for like an educational sort of circumstance where like you're like, oh, like that's the moon. But like if you switch it over, you can now zoom in like 100 times and see in much more detail. You could like maybe use the large picture to line something up. And then by like switching the branch of the cactus, you could then zoom in, but where you're zooming in now.
That's a good one. I was just thinking of a cactus that can defend itself, a telescope that can defend itself.
It just has prickly spikes everywhere.
Like the most useless invention.
Oh man,
a cactus you cannot use, a telescope you cannot use.
You have ID'd incorrectly, and his spikes
pokes you in the eye. Yikes!
But no, I think you have a good idea with like I'm kind of picturing the telescope like the main shoot of it is maybe like your biggest aperture or zoom that you have on it, and you have the side branches that could. I guess if you do like you would have astronomy telescopes that are multispectral, maybe like those branches would look at different parts of the spectra.
You could do that too.
That could be pretty a useful way. Like it could go by zoom, it could go by spectral part. That can give you a lot of information on atmospheric distortions, for example.
It just simplifies your pointing to like make sure that you're all looking at the exact same spot with all your sensors.
Are there any environmental factors that's worth considering if you're in the desert, if you're trying to observe the nighttime? Because I'm thinking cactus is a desert, so maybe this is like desert nighttime observation.
So you do have light pollution in cities, which like you would need to filter out, and so maybe it's just like a very remote telescope in the middle of the desert.
Yeah, I guess you have dust storms and like just I don't know if there are things you have to consider if you're trying to go out to a desert to watch the sky, the stars and stuff.
So like a natural event that you would be
like, let's say I'm a person that wanted to observe the Orion constellation out at the Nevada desert, or I don't know, somewhere out there. What are the challenges that I as an individual would have to what would I encounter if I'm out there? Is there anything unique about being in the desert versus just going up to Griffith Observatory?
Yeah, so like my mind does go back to light pollution. Griffith being so close to LA.
Yeah. But
if you were to pick Mount Whitney, so a little further out, they probably have a little bit also higher altitude, less light pollution, less atmospheric distortion because you're higher up. So let's say if you're going out in the middle of a desert, or probably you're not necessarily at sea level, but you're probably at a lower altitude, so atmospheric distortion. Maybe wildlife or critters are out there. Maybe it's a telescope that warns you of approaching critters while you're busy staring and you're not looking.
That might be useful. I mean, if you never know there's like a rattlesnake or something nearby.
Yeah.
It could be just a general purpose survival telescope. It's got the SOS beacon, snack pouch.
Now here, let's maybe take it in a different direction where it's not necessarily going.
Very silly.
No, but I was kind of. It made me think of what if you're trying to do wildlife observation, and so you're not necessarily looking up, but you're looking maybe horizontal or like better tracking of wildlife. Recognize your rattlesnakes.
Yeah, maybe you're like somewhere like the Joshua Tree Park. Maybe you're just trying to observe the wildlife there, hares or lizards. I don't know.
It could be a wildlife observation platform disguised as a cactus. It's like each of the limbs rotate independently, so like it can look at like multiple spots at the same time.
Pushing the little camera holes like
exactly. So it's like you have the cactus arms that go first outwards, then upwards, and then at the top of each arm you have like a rotating camera that will look around.
You know what I love about this? This reminds me of those cartoons you watch as a kid, where there's a cactus with the sunglasses and the cowboy hat, like the sneaky thing. But we're really leaning into this. This could be great for like wildlife observation, as well as people who are intruding into that space when they're not supposed to be. Maybe poachers, even, or like
I wonder if that could be a company that does disguised cameras. Like maybe like Cactus is their core product, but like it could be a rock that's actually a camera, just like or a tree, just like fake natural elements that actually are maybe either observation or a surveillance system.
And cacti might be a good choice because people are less likely to mess with them. They blend into natural environments. Like animals are probably not going to go up and investigate them as much because they have spines.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think since maybe not the dawn of time, but I think you always had like this sort of desire to conceal objects. Like I'm thinking World War I, for example, had these like fake observation trees that were a little removed from the trenches, so it looked like kind of a dead tree, but it was actually hollowed out, and you had an observer inside to be able to observe troop movement while not looking like someone poking their head out of a trench. So maybe that's a dual use technology. In some cases, like you said, maybe someone going on private property or wildlife observation because you're more discreet. I'm trying to remember the name of the documentary, but it wasn't Blackfish, but it was one about the dolphins in Japan being massacred, they had a whole team basically hide some cameras as rocks underwater to be able to film, discreetly.
Yeah.
So they weren't in an area where they weren't supposed to, so they kind of went and dove in and hid those cameras, and they hid some as well, sort of on the outskirts of this cove as well, and so kind of camouflage cameras. So for them it was like a one-off, but yeah, maybe that could be like a whole business of its own.
Yeah, just in general, like its own, like I don't know what the right industry would this be, like some kind of surveillance thing, private security even, maybe at a military base if you're out in the desert. I'm not sure what the exact industry is, but like private security or something like that, it could be useful.
Have a rock following you around.
It's like, why is there a solar panel next to that rock?
Yeah, this is weird.
Why is there a wire going from
That rock's face just constantly keeps looking at me wherever I go.
Wait a second, that rock looks the same from this angle as it did from the other angle.
A trail in the sand of the rock.
It's only moving when you're not looking at it.
Rocks will actually move around the Mojave. Like you could see trails.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's because of the ground freezing.
Yeah, it's the ground freezing.
No, yeah, that's what they say.
Started the conspiracy theory today.
Rocks are alive, guys.
It was. I'm now trying to remember the original prompt. Cactus telescope.
Yeah,
Cactus telescope.
Thanks. Trying to recalibrate. Let's see.
Well, we can always go about it like our typical route. Can we try abstract this?
That's exactly where mine was, like telescope, like discovery, exploration, foresight, maybe even seeing things far out, and you're gonna give it a temporal aspect to it.
Well, telescopes, what do they magnify an image of something, right, to the observer.
Yeah.
I wonder.
Now I'm thinking cactus, water, and liquid lenses. Basically, is how I'm combining those two, which already exists. We're not really inventing anything new here, but
Cactus telescope probably wouldn't be the right name for this company. But what comes to my mind is like a company that does like that produces water in like barren environments. I was watching this YouTube video, I think like last night, that was talking about trying to apply electricity in the air in like some sort of, it's like a little glass container for like you would put like a pet and something in there, but they put like sand, and I think they were doing some sort of electrolysis or something like that. They were using like a couple thousand volts, so a lot of energy, but I think you could create water from the vapor in the air. But I wonder if telescope could be alluding to you being able to create more of something that was there, but more of it. And if you're in the desert, you need water, and there's a lot of places in the world where people do need fresh water.
yeah.
So again, like Cactus telescope, it doesn't exactly, it's not the right name for a product like this, but that's what's coming to my mind, is something that can create water in an environment where fresh water may not be readily available.
Yeah, I see the cactus part of it too. And yeah, there's some cool technology developments on like trying to essentially grab moisture out of the air, for example, or different forms of electrolysis, or finding water trapped in different forms, may that be soil or otherwise, evaporation or condensation, for example. Yeah, not sure how we tie in the telescope part.
Yeah.
But that's still pretty cool, It's a good in situ resource utilization case. Trying to see if there's a abstracted notion of telescope that's like, I guess if you go for maybe exploration or things that are far away, maybe remote and arid environments falls into that in a loose definition, just to tie it back in.
Use the cactus as the barrel of the telescope. Just cut out telescope. Cactus, when you bore a hole in the...
Improvised telescopes that can defend themselves.
I really like the idea you had way in the beginning, Jonathan, where you had like a telescope that could maybe like swap lenses or something. Because I know I in my neighborhood we have people who grow cactuses with like those little fruits and bulbs things that come out on the tops. And now I'm thinking about those could be like those lenses, like you know how a microscope has like those multiple lenses on a swivel that you can rotate. So maybe you could have a telescope. This is probably something that exists already, but a telescope that has multiple kinds of lenses, not just like magnification, but like literally different kinds of spectrums. Like maybe an IR lens or something like that. I don't think that works for a lens. You need different sensors as well. But actually, the more I think about it, maybe it wouldn't work. But I think I just really like the idea you had way in the beginning, Jonathan.
Yeah, you could use lenses that like let certain wavelengths of light in.
Polarization maybe. Light polarization could be something.
Or like just like different materials or like are transparent. Like some are transparent to IR, some lenses are transparent to visible. Yeah. So like that, that's why the sky looks so different when you look at it like with like different wavelengths. Yeah, so it would be complicated. I mean, when you think about cacti, they're very frugal. They're able to do a lot with a little. They're also very defensive, or maybe you could call them very kind of counteroffensive. As in, if you mess with them, you're probably not going to have a great time. So I wonder if there's a way to apply those principles to a telescope, something that's both very efficient, very frugal, And
Oh, maybe a telescope that operates in a region where there is very little light. Maybe.
I think X-ray, for example. Like,
Maybe.
yeah.
But I feel like at that point you might move to other spectrums. Maybe like IR even. If
maybe
you're
it just
doing with
uses a very long exposure
Mhm.
for some reason, just so that it, can make the most when there's little light.
yeah,
But it,
it would have to be like a
acts more
static
slowly.
object.
Yeah, I'm not trying to think of long exposure telescopes that, like, I guess, yeah, cacti have time to kill, so maybe that is the long exposure.
Mhm.
It's kind of a tough one.
Yeah, it's tricky.
Like, is there anything you can do with the, I guess, would they be called spikes on the cactus, the needles? Like, could that in itself, as opposed to just being prickly, be a sensing element, like whiskers, for example? Like, could you do anything with...
If they're different lengths, you could maybe use them to detect sound too,
Yeah.
like vibrations in the air. They'll like resonate.
vibration?
When you have like each spine maybe works on like a different frequency.
It's like the ultimate radio antenna.
Mm-hmm.
It's yeah, like I guess like telescope observation in a looser sense, maybe sound or ground vibrations even. Maybe
Yeah,
you
it
can
could be
feel
a geophone of some kind.
Yeah, I feel like a truck rolling in the distance or something.
Mm-hmm.
Could you get a probe, like a mass probe, like a spectrometer, like that small, like of a needle? I wonder if you have like at least one on something of a shape of a cactus, maybe you could get the composition of like the air, like the chemical composition. Maybe if considering if you're in maybe on a different planet, that might be more useful. If a cactus could survive on Mars or something.
Martian mass spec cacti. I'm seeing it now.
Maybe it's a really sort of low tech, low power like way to basically perform like a Fourier transform, like because you can have spines that are only sensitive to certain frequencies. And you could say like this frequency corresponds with like a truck, or this frequency corresponds with like a drone.
That'd be interesting.
And so like it wouldn't need any of the active computing elements to like listen and then do data analysis. It could just be that it could be like a mechanical vibration sensor.
Maybe a resonant frequency.
And when you hit certain frequencies, it resonates.
Yeah.
And then that mechanical will like wake up the electronics and have it then do something.
Yeah,
That's
it's like
really
a
cool.
bunch of piezo sensors, and you change maybe the root width and the length of that needle to have whatever characteristics you need it to have, and yeah, could identify.
Could be useful for very low power remote applications.
Yeah, that could be interesting. Yeah, quake sensing maybe or something.
Well, I was thinking more like defense. If you're trying to like perform some espionage on the enemy, and you know that their base is in a desert, you can get like something that looks like a cactus.
We're back to the moving rock.
Looks like that's right.
But like going to what you're saying before, if you have multiple spikes that respond to different frequencies, maybe you can extrapolate this frequency. Oh, this spike is vibrating a lot. That means there are X amount of trucks passing by at this point. Oh, is this spike vibrating? Oh, we can tell that there's jets coming by at this point, and then maybe you can even tell like different people's voices. Oh, is this one leader who we know sounds like this? Is this guy here based on what spike is being vibrating at this point? But then it's just like a cactus. So who would know that this cactus is a tool of espionage? Or
It's the hat that gave
Is
it
it
away.
just me, or does that cactus vibrate when I speak? Cactus like
It's like a little cell phone like buzz.
yeah, just like shivers, and you're like, yikes.
it's a cold cactus.
But without necessarily being in plain sight, like you probably do have like an ability to run some kind of analysis and being able to pick up on like what was said too. I mean, you've had cases of machine learning, for example, where people are able to recreate conversations based on video footage of devices that didn't have cameras. I mean, not cameras, didn't have microphones, because the conversation that vibration propagates through air, and it impacts the lens, and it imparts a tiny vibration on the lens, but that distorts the image, and from that, some people have been able to recreate conversations.
That's crazy.
So I guess
Wow.
I don't know how close you could get, because it probably decays 1 to the r square or cube, maybe, I guess, because it's a sphere.
yeah.
But yeah, maybe you can have something sensitive enough that you can get a conversation from like a base far away.
I'm just imagining you have a whole army of cacti just near an enemy base. There's a whole force of them. Like one day it's not there, but overnight, and then they wake up and they're like, "Where did all these cacti just come from?"
Every night they move closer. Not creepy at all.
All these cacti are just moving to one of our top secret offices. What's going on?
Yeah. The one general has like 6 cacti.
Oh man.
I'm just picturing like a bunch of allies, and none of them can agree on which nation's cacti will be the one spying, so they're all moving their cacti in.
Oh man. Like this sounds silly, but I could also feel like I can see a world where this could actually work. Something.
Yeah. That's an interesting application. Yeah, that's a good one.
Well, alrighty. I think this was a pretty funny and awesome idea. If anyone else listening in has any cool ideas what the Cactus telescope should be, please leave it in the comments, and don't forget to answer this week's poll about the big question about honesty. Thank you everyone for listening to this week's Pample Pod, and we look forward to having you all next week.
I'll see you next time.
See you.
See ya.